What is up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. There is just constantly so much. There are things I would like to talk about on this show that unfortunately I just don't have time to. We're going to start, as we always do here on the Touchline Talk Show, with Champions League reaction, actually going through all of the groups, talking about what they look like 4 games into the group stage. And then it's MLS playoff time. One of my favorite sporting competitions, events of the year. So I'm going to break it all down, talk about the teams I think are real contenders, the biggest storylines heading in, all of that good stuff. But as always, going to the Champions League first. This week I actually wanted to sort of go through and break down each group instead of talking about 2 or 3 bigger games, both based on the results that happened and the fact that there weren't as many high profile individual games that I felt like deserved attention, and because I haven't actually done this where we're going through every single group to help set the stage with 2 games remaining, and now the fact we have some teams who have already booked their spot into the knockout stage. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, starting with Group A. Of course, the story here continues to be Napoli get another win over Ajax to book their spot in the Champions League knockout stage. And Liverpool gets an early scare, goes down. Scott Arfield scores for Rangers, and then Liverpool score and score some more, and then Mo Salah comes on and scores the fastest hat trick in Champions League history, and they end in an absolute demolition of Rangers to maintain that second spot in the group, with Ajax losing again to Napoli. And so this is pretty clear. Liverpool is in a terrific position in that second game. It all changed when they were able to beat Ajax, and then Ajax didn't take any points off Napoli. And so Liverpool all of a sudden are in a good position here. Ajax, I do want to point out, though, there is some hope. Just in the sense that if you beat Liverpool, and you can do so convincingly, Liverpool do have to play Napoli again. Now, that could very well be a Napoli team with nothing to play for. But there is that part of it that you can make up 3 points just by beating Liverpool yourself, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that you get a little help as well. But that's asking a lot. Liverpool just have to get something somewhere, and they're going to be just fine. Also on Napoli, before I jump off of this group, they're 4 goals, 6 goals. I mean, they're scoring at a ridiculous rate. And by the way, Victor Osimhen came back after a month being sidelined with an injury, and he's, doing his thing again. All of this has happened. The Liverpool game was the game he got injured in at the very beginning. And everything they've done in the last month plus is without their preferred number 9. It's absolutely remarkable the amount of contributions they're getting from all over the place. They continue to just do their thing. And so now, one of the first teams into the knockout stage, Liverpool on the verge of joining them and kind of rounding out Group A from that standpoint. And certainly Ajax are in position to get that Europa League spot at the very worst. Group B. Shout out Club Brugge. I mentioned this a little bit. Officially in. All these games keep ending in strange results where nobody's consistent outside of Club Brugge. You get some draws in there, and 10 points are enough to secure you a spot. And then the other game here, Bayer Leverkusen looked terrific in Xabi Alonso's debut. And that one didn't go so good today. Nothing went their way at the beginning of the game. I mean, they can't convert a penalty. You get a goal chopped off and all of a sudden Porto are kind of running wild to maintain that second spot in this group. Everything is still in play here, obviously, because it's so tight. But I'm really looking at that Atleti Porto game in Portugal on the final match day as perhaps one of the most important games, at least on match day 6 and potentially of the entire group stage. I've highlighted a couple other ones I felt were really, really important, including that Liverpool Ajax game that Liverpool managed to win. I think this one is also right there because Atletico Madrid just have not done enough. But Porto also haven't capitalized to the fullest extent possible, and so this is very much up for grabs. And the Club Brugge aspect of this is interesting too because, okay, yeah, you haven't locked up the first spot yet, but you're getting pretty close to that too. What does Club Brugge provide these last two games knowing they're already in, and what an accomplishment that is? That's always sort of the other part of this is you might catch a break with the team you play later. Now, of course, Porto and Atletico Madrid had that head-to-head end, but this is very much wide open, and that's the game I'm looking at. Today's story, though, is really about Club Brugge finding a way to get a point. Wasn't always pretty, but Mignolet came up big. That's all you needed to make sure you're going through. Congratulations to them. And then we get to where we're going to spend the most time here, and that is Group C. The big storyline coming out of these two games is what happened with Inter and Barcelona. Before I get to that, Bayern Munich score some more, ultimately concede 2 goals, but I'd already put 4 past Victoria Pilsen. 4 for 4, automatically in, so they're another team that has clinched their spot in the knockout stage. Wanted to acknowledge that before I get into Inter and Barca. There are a couple things I want to say before I get to the failings of Barcelona here. One is, it has to be acknowledged who was playing in that back line today. You're missing center back after center back after center back. You don't have, just in the defensive midfield, the back line, Xavi had nothing close to his preferred team. And the way that those goals were conceded, it was quite obvious that was the situation. Again, it's not Barcelona being bad. And that's one of the most fascinating parts of this. And, they do get the draw, so they're not technically eliminated. But what is turning into another disastrous Champions League campaign is it's not like they're getting outplayed every single game. And this group had 3 teams that are 3 of the top 16 in the world, and only 2 can go through. So you got unlucky in that sense as well. But it's this combination of, they didn't capitalize on some of the opportunities and the games where they outplayed teams and left this window, left the door open to something like this happening. And then you get all the injuries and your margin of error is gone. And so you have a game like this where you're able to rescue a point, and it's probably not going to matter at all because you didn't have the ability to drop points. This game, you were in control if you won it, and you were in big trouble if you didn't. This is another one of those pivotal games in the group stage, one of the most important of any group, because it shifted the balance between Inter and Barcelona so significantly. Not only in the points part of this, but also in the tiebreaker part of this. Barcelona had to win this game, and they didn't. Partially that has, the center backs, Xavi doesn't want to be playing either of those guys, and he had to play both of them. That's part of the story here. And the other thing is, I was at one point prepared to come in here and talk about Robert Lewandowski not delivering in a big moment again. But then he equalizes twice to keep their Champions League hopes alive and was playing like a guy who didn't want to go to the Europa League. And so you did get that part of it, and they did score their goals. Right? The story coming into this has been not taking the opportunities. They're creating these chances. They deserve to win, but they're not actually scoring. You get the 3 goals today, but the defense lets you down, and you have to keep digging yourself out of a hole as opposed to being on the front foot for most of this game and in control. And it was kind of a weird back and forth where Inter were really good at the beginning. Barcelona survive. Then Inter have to go retake the initiative after Barcelona opened the scoring and do so. And then Barcelona regains some energy and gets it, Robert Lewandowski scores. You have time to go get a winner. You concede again. You equalize again. It was just so back and forth. It's not like Inter played him off the field or anything. The draw was probably a fair result, but it wasn't good enough because you lost the first one when you were the better team. You lost to Bayern when you were the better team. You didn't do what you needed to do to capitalize on these performances. So it creates this really weird dilemma where I still am impressed with Barcelona as a team. And look at what they're doing in La Liga. They are playing quite well. This idea of Xavi needs to go, to me, is ridiculous. What is he supposed to do? Look at the team he inherited. Look at where they've already gotten. And all of that goes to the larger point that I will talk about some here, which is the inevitable discussion about the idea that and I talked about this when Barcelona chose to do it, that you sacrificed your future or bet your future on consistent Champions League excellence. Just disregarded all logic, all concern about the financial ramifications of what you were doing, with the idea that if you pull enough levers and get by for now, you're going to be able to turn this team back into one of the very best in Europe that is, and not only that, a team that is also going to consistently deliver, Champions League semifinals, Champions League finals, and of course winning the Champions League. Getting all of those payouts, after every single round. It's not enough to just get Barcelona back to being a team that can win La Liga. What they were really betting on was the Champions League part of this. And they were absolutely good enough. Absolutely good enough to go through in this group. And now they're hanging on for dear life to the hope that somehow Inter drop 4 points from these next 2 games. And on the Inter side of this, the other part of this that makes it so bizarre for me, they still have not beaten a good team not named Barcelona all season. But they've done enough. Because Barcelona just didn't have that cutting edge, they clearly were not up for the challenge of getting through this group. And that's what they were betting on, is that, right, there's always a chance you get put in a tough group. There's also always a chance, for some reason, you end up second and you draw Manchester City in the round of 16. It's not a guarantee you get to the Champions League semifinals every season. And that was basically the way Barcelona were operating. And now, unless a miracle happens, they're headed back to the Europa League. But this can't be a commentary on Xavi. It's a commentary on the situation he inherited and the way this club is being run. He is doing a very, very good job. They are significantly better than when he took over. And that's all you can ask for him as a manager. They're just, didn't go from being a non-factor on the European stage, essentially, or a team that goes out in the quarterfinals, to a top 3 team in Europe. And honestly, I've had them in my top 5, top 8 most of the season because they've been playing like it. But that doesn't mean you're one of the 3 favorites to win the Champions League. It's a different level of competition, a different question. And the answer clearly has been they are simply not ready for that challenge yet, which is understandable considering how far they had to go to turn from what they were to what they're expected to be in order to save this team's financial situation. That's all I've got there. So we're going to move on to Group D. This is just a chaotic mess that changes every single week. Spurs start with a horrific error from Eric Dyer, but then really gain control. Son does his thing, and all of a sudden, they're at the top of the group. Marseille have one of the easier Champions League games you will ever see. Not 1 second yellow, but 2. They were winning and up a man, I think it was in the first 20 minutes. Pretty quickly after that, it was 11v9. And so they just cruised to another win over Sporting Lisbon. So now they had the head-to-head tiebreaker. And in 2 weeks, went from being a team that couldn't win a game in the Champions League to being in control and in position to make the round of 16 and get out of their group. Because, again, nobody has separated themselves, and they beat the team they needed to twice. Spurs were always the best team in this group and are starting to play like it. And on paper, Marseille is team number 2. And based on what has happened this season domestically, Marseille are team number 2. I mentioned that when they were incredibly disappointing over those first 2 games. Now things have kind of flipped. They're catching some breaks. They're taking advantage. And really, even if they lose to Spurs again, there's a good chance that they're still going to be in control of their own destiny and be able to get out of this group. I really like their chances now, which is something I never thought I would be saying 2 weeks ago. But here we are. Group E, another one that has changed sort of week to week depending on what happens. Chelsea now at the top. Controversial red on Fikayo Tomori. I probably would have given it a yellow, but to me that was a penalty. And Chelsea were the better team. That's not the reason they won this game. Yes, I know. And Olivier Giroud did have a chance pretty quickly after the red and the penalty that ensued. Did it take away Milan's chance to win? Yeah, probably. Were they going to? I'm just not convinced they were. So Chelsea do their job and all of a sudden are starting to look better and better and are winning games consistently under Graham Potter, which is something to take note of, that this team is really starting to roll. And Salzburg draw with Dynamo Zagreb to keep the door open for AC Milan. This is going to be another one of those huge games when those two teams meet. Salzburg now have the 2 difficult games left. And Chelsea have not clinched anything, and AC Milan clearly have work to do. So you don't have the luxury of maybe facing a Chelsea team that's heavily changed because they're already through and you don't have to worry about things. Everybody still has stuff to play for in this group. Nobody has guaranteed their spot yet. I still am going to back what I said at the beginning, that Red Bull Salzburg is going to get out of this group. But they got to still do it. This draw was not particularly helpful. And what the draws that they were getting against Milan and Chelsea did was, right, it lowered the amount of points possible. It kept them in the conversation, but at some point you got to pick up 3 points. Because Chelsea and AC Milan are going to start doing that, at least one of them. So that's what this is going to come down to for me. Is I don't think 8 points are going to be enough. Maybe 8 on the nose gets you there. But if Salzburg can find a way to win one more time, they should be through very comfortably. So this is another one. A Salzburg loss and an AC Milan win changes everything. It is all right there. Chelsea could implode. I don't see it happening. But this is one of the more fascinating groups to follow as some of these become, and I'm going to get to a couple here in particular at the end of this, that are just not that interesting anymore. This is, to me, from the beginning and still the most interesting group we have in the Champions League this year. Group F. Real Madrid avoided a third loss to Shakhtar Donetsk in 4 games over the past, I believe it's 3 seasons. They didn't play them last year. But if I had kind of forgotten that Shakhtar beat them twice, and Shakhtar gave them all kinds of trouble this season as well, but they do get a point out of it. And those drop points for Shakhtar are a big, big deal, because this could have gotten, I don't think Real Madrid would have been in trouble had they lost. But this would have gotten interesting, because you've got those 3 teams that all would have been right there. And now it's Real Madrid clearly in charge of this thing, and Leipzig and Shakhtar battling for spot number 2. Leipzig got some much needed wins against Celtic. Poor Celtic. It's not happening for the Scottish teams. Incredibly disappointing. Really thought they were going to perform better, and it's not happening. So that is notable that Leipzig did their job, which is something that, Shakhtar weren't able to do both times against Celtic. But Leipzig also lost to Shakhtar and Real Madrid by a combined score of 6-1 the first time around. Even though they are in position number 2 right now, I am skeptical about their ability to hold on to that. But at the same time, if they beat Shakhtar, they're in really good shape. So this is another one of those strange groups. I'm really intrigued by this battle. It's clear these are the 3 teams that are going to continue in European competition. Real Madrid is going to go through. The question is, can Leipzig sort of ride this sort of wave of momentum? But it's not like they're playing great in the Bundesliga. But Timo Werner is starting to score goals. Can they ride that to an important win against Shakhtar and get themselves in? Or is Shakhtar going to continue this incredible run during this incredibly challenging period in their history and just the situation they're in, and incredibly somehow find a way to get through? That's another group to keep an eye on moving forward in these final 2 weeks. Group G, there is not much to say here. Manchester City sat some players ahead of this game against Liverpool over the weekend. Then Riyad Mahrez, who for some reason took another penalty. Now, I believe he did convert one recently in the Premier League. I don't remember which game, but I've harped on this before. Statistically, he's just not the guy who should be taking penalties. He misses one. Then City go down a man. They just hold on for a point. It's not going to matter. It's fine. Dortmund then proceeded to also drop points, which makes it even more fine that Manchester City drew. This is one of my frustrations with the Champions League group stage, is these results just don't matter. Most of the time they matter. Most of these groups are extremely competitive, but you get 1 or 2 groups every year where it's very clear who the favorites are, and it turns out that way. Sometimes you're surprised, but there are always stuff that just goes to form, and this is one of those groups this season. You know who the best 2 teams are, and they're performing like it. Jude Bellingham continues to love this competition. He's been spectacular. That's really all I have to say there. Haaland was one of those guys who was rested. It's the amount of games being played this season, I have absolutely no issue with it. And Pep Guardiola has the luxury of basically whatever team he fields, unless he throws 11 academy kids out there, it's a team that expects to win and should win. So you can't really criticize him and say he's not trying to win, because there was more than enough talent out there, despite the fact that some guys were rested. And then finally, Group H. I talked about Benfica after the first draw against PSG. They went and did it again, this time in Paris. Actually, the XG numbers I saw outperformed PSG over those 180 minutes, which is incredible. Now, yes, the second time around you didn't have Messi, and there is another issue that needs to be addressed here in a moment with PSG, but I continue to be impressed with Benfica. They're a top 15 team in the world for me. I don't know what else you want them to do. They've been outstanding domestically and in this competition, and in a group that is not as competitive or as difficult as I thought it would be, because Juventus is falling apart, but also not a give me where they were clearly the second best team heading into this thing. And Maccabi Haifa just beat Juventus, so that says something about Maccabi Haifa too. Before I get on Juve for a minute here, I want to at least acknowledge the Kylian Mbappe situation, the reports he wants to leave. This is one of those things I refuse to just speculate on and just talk about because there were some reports. Of course, I will address this more if he actually leaves or if we get some kind of noteworthy development. The couple things I will say quickly, though. First, and I saw even, I believe Julian Laurent made this point on a video I was watching that I believe was at some point during the Champions League coverage. I could be wrong about all that. If I am, I apologize. But I believe he was saying, it's not just me who's reporting this. And even if it was just Julian Laurent reporting this, one of the interesting aspects of this to me is it's Fabrizio Romano, it's Julian Laurent, it is big names who are coming out and verifying this stuff. Maybe they weren't I don't think they were the very first to report that Mbappe is unhappy and wants to leave. But very quickly, once the rumors started coming out and some of the more tabloidy stuff, the most credible sources in this game from a media standpoint hopped on real quick and verified it. People are not going to, I think Jamie Carragher was the one that made this point, right? People are not going to risk their credibility on this if there's not a good reason for it. Now, what does he want? He's unhappy mean? Does he actually want to leave? That part is still a little iffy to me, although it certainly seems that people are saying he wants to leave. I'm just open to the possibility that got misconstrued somewhere in there and they're able to figure this out. So that's part one, is this is legit. I find it hard to believe that, and I am a person who is skeptical about soccer reporting. There's too much just nonsense that flies around. But these people, the people who have come and said, I've got sources, I can verify this, I'm putting my name on it, speaks volumes about how serious this situation is and how unhappy Mbappe is. The second thing I will say is I'm not at all surprised that PSG are basically just refuting this in every way possible and saying he is a PSG player and he's going to honor his contract. What incentive do they have to, even if he is unhappy, you can't, and I talked about this when he signed this contract, you cannot replace him. The only player who is comparable in the world is Erling Haaland, and he's not going anywhere for at least the next couple seasons. It's not just losing Mbappe, it is the fact that there is not another player who fits his skills, his resume, and his age profile. There is no comparison. And of course, he plays a different position than Haaland. So even that is not, now Haaland would be a perfect fit in this team from you put Messi on one side, Neymar on the other, or play him underneath or something like that. But there's no point having that conversation because Haaland's not going to PSG in the near future. So, what incentive do PSG have to cave into his commands if this is really the case and he wants to leave? At the very least, they can hold out for the best possible deal from Real Madrid. And are Real Madrid going to go sit there and say, yeah, we'll splash 200 million euros, 250 million euros on him, and then pay the most expensive wages in the world because Mbappe is the highest paid player in the world right now, on a guy that 5 months ago they could have had for free, who chose not to join their team? Now, previous reporting had said they were willing to spend all of that money on him when his contract was running down. They they were, they weren't insistent that they were going to wait for him to become a free agent. So maybe they are willing to spend the money. And ultimately, all contracts do is, from a team perspective, is it gives you leverage. It's not a guarantee people are going to be able to, you're going to be able to convince guys to stick around. But I want to hear more before I start talking about this from kind of Mbappe's standpoint, and because I do want to be sensitive to the possibility. Basically, what he's saying is that promises were made to him that weren't kept. That's a real thing. My personality makes me very empathetic to that. Also, you signed the contract, man. I will say that I don't want to get too far into what this says about Mbappe and all of those kind of things. Those are the 2 points I wanted to make quickly on this, though, is there is something to this based on who is reporting it and who is verifying it. And I'm just not convinced the fact Mbappe wants to leave means all that much. Maybe he can force his way out. But Harry Kane wanted to leave Spurs too. And Spurs said at the right price, and Manchester City didn't meet that price. And now Harry Kane is probably going to be a Tottenham player for the rest of his career. Maybe something changes, but that's how quickly this stuff can go. And it's what happens when a team has leverage, and that is what PSG have because Kylian Mbappe signed that contract. He tied his future to theirs, and that is not something you can undo quickly because you are unhappy. I find it hard to believe he's going to be a Real Madrid player by the time the January transfer window ends. Maybe I'm wrong and this is worse than I thought, but I wanted to at least give some thoughts on that because it is a huge story and he is one of, again, 2 players above everybody else that can change the complexion of the European hierarchy are Mbappe and Haaland. Haaland just moved. Mbappe apparently wants to move, so I'm going to address that, but that's as far as I'm going to go for now. I want to hear more. I want to understand exactly what Mbappe is upset about. I just ultimately think this is going to blow over and not end up being a huge deal. Kind of the same thing that, we're not talking about Harry Kane and how he wanted to leave anymore. We're talking about Harry Kane delivering for Spurs in the Champions League. I think that's what we're going to get to, and Mbappe is going to at least ride out this contract. Whether he signs another one, I was never convinced of that anyway. I still think he's going to play these seasons for PSG, and then he's somewhere between now and when his contract expires, he's going to be at Real Madrid. I just don't think it's going to happen in January.